All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Our colleague, Councilmember Rice, will be here hopefully momentarily, but want to make sure that we end as close to on time as possible. Well, good morning, everybody. Want to thank the representatives from the Treehouse and HHS. If the following people could come forward, Mr. Thomas Grazio, Mr. Cole Jenkins, Dr. Crowell, Joanne Barnes, and Lisa Merkin. So I want to thank Ms. Yao for putting together this packet, but I really want to begin by thanking the Treehouse and DHHS for doing this incredibly important work. My colleagues and I, particularly the new council members, have had the opportunity to visit a number of organizations over the last year or so, and I'll be honest, there's been no visit more impactful for me personally than the one that I took when I went to the Treehouse. You know, we often talk about serving vulnerable populations, but my goodness, there is no more vulnerable population than the population served by the Treehouse. And while unfortunately the need is growing for a variety of reasons, as I'm sure we will hear about, the reality also is that there are physical limitations to the space that we visited when we went to the Treehouse as well. And so as I've observed through the council process so far, framing this issue and providing some context helps us within committees to then advocate among our colleagues and figure out a solution in partnership with the executive branch. So in part, this is to hear about the growing challenges, but also some of the very real practical challenges that the county needs to be focusing on. So want to thank all of the members of this illustrious panel for coming forward. And Vivian, was there anything that you wanted to say up front that you want to make sure that we cover before having these folks introduce themselves?
Well, just to set the stage, the committee has been monitoring the wait list of the Treehouse for some time and has been worried about the wait time for therapeutic services. During consideration of the fiscal year 20 operating budget, the committee kind of held off making any recommendations for additional funding in order to let the strategic planning process for the organization take place, as well as to wait to see whether they were successful in attracting grant funding that they were pursuing. So again, the committee will be receiving a briefing on the strategic planning process, development efforts, expansion of therapeutic capacity, as well as the current wait list. Council staff notes that the organization has been successful in attracting additional grant funding since the committee discussed this in April of last year, of this year. But because of waitlist trends, council staff anticipates that there will continue to be a waitlist even with expanded capacity, and that it would very likely grow. And so again, there's space limitations, et cetera, but if there's a way to consider a special appropriation, if that makes sense, then council staff has outlined something on page 3 of your packet.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Yao. If everybody could introduce themselves, and I believe, Mr. Grazio, you're first up to speak, and if each person could give just a quick overview within your presentations, and then we'll get to the Q&A. So if everybody could introduce themselves.
I'm Tom Grazio, the director of the Treehouse.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Yeah.
In our office, we have no buttons. I'm Tom Grazio, the director of the Treehouse. I've been there since 2012.
Great. Thank you.
Nicole Jenkins, I'm the president of the board of the Treehouse. I've been a community representative, so it's been quite some time that I've been involved with the Treehouse, and we have a group of very dedicated, disciplined board members looking forward to continuing to serve the Treehouse.
Fabulous. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Raymond Kroll. I'm the director of the Department of Health and Human Services, and happy to be here this morning again.
Thank you very much.
Joanne Barnes, Chief of Children, Youth, and Family Services at Health and Human Services. I'm really pleased that you had the opportunity to visit the Treehouse, and you see some of the great work that they do as well as the challenges. I will say that we have done so much over the last couple of years to make that space better, but we're still limited by the walls that we have. So we continue to consider that a challenge that we're looking at. But thank you for having made that visit.
Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Merkin. I'm the Administrator for Child Welfare Services, and we have a very, very strong collaboration with the Treehouse because they are our child assessment center that sees the children that we see that are abused and neglected.
Great. Thank you so much. Tom, if you want to start, talk us through a little bit of what's going on and some of the challenges and opportunities.
I'm happy to. I want to say that the Treehouse is a public-private partnership, something that I believed was the way to go because we could add to the county appropriation with private dollars to help us meet the mission of this organization. So since the nonprofit was formed and became our partner in FY18, in private dollars, we've gone from $351K to a projected $543K this year. So the board and the staff do their job to help increase our capacity. Capacity is simply stated a double-edged sword. We have space issues and we have dollar issues, but we are working aggressively on both. I sat here a year ago or so and told you how difficult it is to run a program and tell a sexually abused child they have to wait for therapy. We have added to the staff. We are limited to add further because of space, but I see the pattern as clear as it is. In FY18, we had 30 kids in August waiting for therapy, and in FY19, we have 27. By the time February rolls around, it will be much larger. Children go back to school and by nature become more visible to the professionals who then call those cases in. Our strategic plan, that is to say the board of directors and their strategic plan, is attacking aggressively the need for scalable and sustainable funding and the need for space, as well as some organizational capacity issues. I think they've done a wonderful job outlining the work for the next 2 years, and we intend to proceed aggressively down those paths. The last thing I would share with you is that this table could be populated not only by Ms. Merkin and Child Welfare, but the Special Victims Investigation Division of the police, the County Attorney's Office, and the State's Attorney's Office, who are all partners in providing the services to the kids who come to the Treehouse. So despite being a nonprofit, it is effectively integrated into the workings of county government and very much focused on the victims of abuse that we serve. I'm happy to answer any questions that come up. Thank you.
Dr. Crowell or Joanne, or if you guys want to, just from DHHS's perspective, what you're seeing in terms of the growing numbers and capacity, and to give an overview, that'd be helpful as well.
I think from the perspective that we're seeing in many of our programs, the needs are growing. I think one of the things that we struggle with the Treehouse program is not only the need in general, but the need to address bilingual clients. And that's something that Tom and his team have worked continuously to bring interns in. We have interns who, because of their schedules, are sometimes sharing offices. That's an advantage for us that we have interns. The flip side of that is that interns are only there for a short period of time, and then we have to bring another set in and gear them up for the work that they do. But the Treehouse is strategically located at Calhoun because it was the Juvenile Assessment Center. It was part of that original design where we would bring children's services together, including DJS, Child Welfare, the police department, and the child care subsidy programs were also there. Over time, we have moved some people out of that building and continue to look at what's feasible to move out in order to provide additional space. So I think those are the two biggest challenges: how to deal with the wait lists and how to deal with the space issues.
So a couple of questions in terms of the wait list. I think, one of the staff recommendations is for the addition of a therapist. What is typically the caseload per therapist as we see within this population?
I'm happy to address that. I will start by telling you that this work is very impacting, and you cannot discount the fact that serving these children and hearing their stories has an emotional toll on the person who hears it. That said, you can create a workload standard, and we have. It is for a full-time equivalent, 15 cases. That gives you ample opportunity for supervision, time to write notes, do whatever relaxation or decompression is necessary, and still help us meet the mission. That might sound lower than what you would hear in other mental health programs, but I'm telling you the nature of our work is specific and it's specialized and it's impacting. So we try to run that standard across all of the mental health positions that we have.
And I know we've spoken often, we just had a session on mental health issues recently, that, identifying qualified therapists is challenging, because the work is particularly challenging, particularly finding folks that are bilingual. Funding is obviously the most critical barrier, but if funding were identified, what's the confidence level in being able to identify a therapist in a timely fashion that could assist with that caseload?
Spanish is the greatest need, although this county is tremendously diverse and we frequently have cases with other languages. I am confident that we are able to find a Spanish-speaking therapist. The challenge is, are they going to run the trauma-informed services that we provide, because we are very specific in the way we treat children, and are they going to be capable to sustain themselves in our setting, because the work is extremely impacting. Having said all that, we have a Spanish-speaking therapist about to start, so yay.
That's great. And the packet also acknowledges the great work of the board on identifying third funding sources and fundraising in general. If we could talk a little bit about that, what has worked and what, if anything, the county can do to assist with those fundraising efforts.
Thank you for the question. The board continues to pursue fundraising efforts. Certainly, as we continue to grow and compile those efforts, we will certainly reach out to the county for additional assistance, and any suggestions that the county might have, we're open for those suggestions.
Wonderful, thank you. And I was not able to make it to the I think it's a bike ride, the fundraiser this year, but I just bought a bike recently, and so I plan on
So we'll look forward to seeing
so
you.
I plan next
You'll
year
hear from
on
us,
participating.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The other question, of course, is space, and I think the public-private partnership is remarkable. That space, in many ways, is optimal in that it's discrete. While it's not as readily accessible to mass transit, which is obviously a challenge, the fact that there's shared space with a number of different organizations, but confidentiality obviously in these cases is so critical on so many different levels. And so I know that DGS in the past has done a great job in identifying alternative locations, but the one-stop shop nature of this work is very important. So I don't know if DHHS is in a position to talk about the feasibility of identifying, or if there's an effort afoot sometime in the near future to explore other space so that you do have more of a one-stop shop, rather, which could help with capacity issues as well.
I think that we've done a lot over the past years to make it a one-stop shop. Even within that building, we had services that were spread literally from one end of the building to the other. And we have moved our exam room into Suite 600. We have created space for interviews to occur in Suite 600, as opposed to having to send them down to the police section of the building. But I do think the bigger issue for us is When the Treehouse became its own private 501c3, we continued to provide space for it as an in-kind contribution to that work. And we are currently sustaining that within our current facilities budget. What we've looked at as alternatives is what really needs to be in 7300 Calhoun. We do have some eligibility and support service programs there, but we've also made a considerable investment in their space in terms of creating a pretty high-tech training lab at 7300 Calhoun, one that the state will take advantage of to make sure that our team is ready for the implementation of their new systems. So we don't want to disrupt that work that we've already done there. But I do think that there are options that we continue to look at to figure out what staff actually need to be there and how to add space onto the Treehouse that is congruent. Is that the right word I want to say? That is connected to the space that they already have, so we don't create a situation where they're scattered throughout the building. So within our resources, I think we're continuing to look at options. What you saw in your visit is a major change over the last 2 years, maybe. It's longer in the planning than it's actually been implemented. But my last visit there, when we kicked off, well, it wasn't my last visit, but when we kicked off the new space, it was impressive what we've done within that space, considering where we were 5 years ago when we were aware space was becoming an issue.
I would just add that I second Joanne's sentiment about the space. The integration of those programs was a key part of our redesign effort for Calhoun. Moving them would be, especially the ones that are directly connected to the Treehouse and involved with the Treehouse, would require moving all of those folks. The other option is to consider relocating a space that is less part of the Treehouse operation and less supportive. HHS is space strapped, space stressed, so everything we do creates a whole series of ripples, and we are continuously looking for additional space and trying to figure out how we make the most of what we have. So this is something we would continue to factor into our thinking about future space. So.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
If I could just add to that, when you come into the Treehouse now, you'll note that the entrance is really through Suite 700 as opposed to going through a smaller door that was in 600 or going through the juvenile services door in Suite 500. So we did convert that lobby over to largely serve both the Treehouse and child and adolescent mental health services. We enlarged it to make it more child-friendly. It certainly is a welcoming environment even when you first walk into the door. So we will continue to look at ways to improve that.
Councilmember Rice has his light on.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for being a bit late. I was with you when we had that celebration of the new space that was there, and so it certainly is one in which we knew in talking to folks that right away, as with anything else, the second it opens, you've utilized it and need more. One of the nuances about this space is that because it needs to be private, because there isn't the option to share rooms and share space as other offices do, it's very uniquely situated in terms of its need of how it's configured. It makes it more space intensive than other partners that we have. Which brings me to your strategic plan, because I think that as a part of the strategic plan and the vision you have in seeking out support from our state partners in terms of state grants, I think that may be the direction, Mr. Chair, that we go in terms of making this a priority for us and identifying to the state delegation. I would also say that while we're looking at space at the current facility at Durwood, what I think might happen is that we may want to look at a more regionalistic approach that addresses what you said about how transportation there is kind of difficult. And so as we look at our up-county regional services centers, as we look at what's happening within MCPS, when we decided to have a separate Edison that's now at Seneca Valley High School, all of these things, we're bringing things to the community instead of requiring the community to find its way to us. And I think that that would help from that perspective, coupling the idea of seeking out where we may see, so as a part of the strategic plan findings that you have, and I'm not sure if you've gotten this piece of the information, but where are the majority of your clients coming from? And seeing where that is. I know you have the data, but certainly, and then identifying that and seeing where regionalistically it may behoove us to put this next new facility. And then seeking out the support of the state delegation coupled with support from the county and private donors. I know you've got folks who have stepped up and done the work. So again, I think that they can get behind something like this. So I think there's potential that's there, certainly from that avenue.
Those are excellent recommendations. I do think that we should follow up with the delegation in anticipation of the legislative session this year, because I'm sure our delegation, just as this council, will be very interested in supporting this critically important work and seeing if we can identify some funding sources both on the capital and potentially operating side, which I think is a really good idea. And I think as part of that strategic plan also looking at more than just one location. Just to be more accessible. I did have one sort of foundational context question. Are there any other organizations, certainly nobody's doing it better than the Treehouse, but are there any other organizations in this space that are also offering these types of wraparound services in the same way? I didn't think so, but I wanted to confirm.
No, sir.
Yeah.
Each county has a child advocacy center that must be accredited to operate. Law enforcement will not take a child to any other place but an accredited child advocacy center.
That's what I thought. Just wanted to confirm. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the pleasure of visiting earlier this year and seeing the incredible work that's being done there. Moving is the only word I can think of. It took a toll on me to go through the rooms and hear the stories as you've laid out the tour, and I remember it. And so I'm glad we're having this follow-up conversation to see how the transition from being part of Primary Care Coalition into your own 501c3 public-private partnership is working out. And so on that note, the transition that you've had, have there been any hurdles, or have there been any learning curves, things internally that maybe we or DHHS have needed to help with or can help with?
I'm going to jump in on this question, Councilman. Thank you for asking it. I'm going to confess that I never was involved in the formation of a 501c3, but I was well aware that the community needed to own this problem. And 6 very brave people who didn't know what the hell we were doing signed the Articles of Incorporation and got us started. I think there have been challenges, and I think we've had moments where we had to figure out the right path. I think everybody has kept their eyes on the need and the opportunity. And I would say DHS has been a great partner in that process. There's open dialogue back and forth. I don't know if our president has a different perspective, but I thought I'd share mine.
I think I would concur on that perspective. It has definitely been a learning experience for all of us, but we've all certainly, rolled our sleeves up and have been very committed throughout the process and continue to be.
Yeah, it's a challenging position to be in, particularly, founding board members, founding executive director, trying to figure it all out. There's a lot there. And the hurdles only continue after you've gotten your 501c3 status, which is labor-intensive process on its own. So kudos to you and the other board members who were here. I saw within the packet the fundraising that you've been doing and the grants that you've been applying for. So keep doing that. And you noted at the beginning the difference of approximately $200,000. So something's working. So that's good. In terms of the language and the need for more Spanish speakers or a full-time Spanish speaker that you're bringing onto staff, what would you say are the second or maybe third other languages, emerging needs, things for us to think about in the future?
We have had cases, small percentages, of People who speak dialectics of French, Haitian, Creole, that type of thing, and forgive me for not being expert on languages, we tend to use the county's interpreter service when we need them. And some African countries, Urdu, and several other languages of Africa, that cases will pop up. It is next to impossible to find specialists in our field who speak those languages, which is why the county's support with language service is so important.
And so what happens, walk me through the steps when someone contacts you and there is that language disconnect.
So let's say that a child presents and speaks Tagalog. Nobody at the treehouse speaks Tagalog, and the first resource would be to see if there's an employee of the county, mostly in human services, who does. And we would ask that individual to step away from their job and come to the treehouse and help, because this child needs to know what's going on in the medical exam. We know the forensic interview will be difficult with an interpreter, but we do what we must. And any therapist who wants to assess suicidality or trauma impact will need an interpreter as well. Failing finding a county employee, there is a language service. One version is the language line, where you can call up and via a telephone have someone interpret. We try to stay away from that. We would prefer to have a person there, so we would seek that service out, which is also available, but takes more time to set up. And that's kind of how we do it.
And I'm intrigued by this, and so the language services, individuals that you'll ask for, is it with Family Services, Youth and Family Services, or is it DHHS, or can you weigh in on kind of how this relationship, an unofficial maybe MOU or whatever it might be?
We have a contract provider that provides translation.
Oh, contract, okay.
We use the Office of Community Affairs manages the contract and makes referrals, allows us and some of our providers to tap into it when they need it. So
great, thank you. And that's considered an in-kind contribution, I presume, on part of the county?
Absolutely.
Yep, good. That's good. Well, more things to do. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your good work.
Councilmember Rice had a follow-up.
So I wanted to follow up on the great questions by Councilmember Glass, because as we do see a greater need for folks who are speaking different languages to go into these fields, it's certainly something in which, in partnering with Montgomery College, with universities at Shady Grove, to make sure that they understand. And so as chair of the Education and Culture Committee, I've written this down so that I can make sure that I pass that along. But it is certainly something that is a part of what we talk about, that we try and grow the fulfillment of that need that we see that's out there. And so certainly when it comes to, especially in our immigrant community, a large portion of them go into our health-related fields anyway. And so from that perspective, it's not that far to have them and to identify that there are jobs that are out there, because folks who want to pursue these jobs and understanding that you represent a unique sort of ability in that you command a language that we need, but also that if you have the training that's necessary, you're a specialization for this job. And I'm sure that job could be utilized in multiple facets, not just with Tree Center. I'm sure that their skills would be something that a lot of folks would want. And so from that perspective, maybe something that there may be a potential for us on. So.
Great. So the question, there's two questions before us. One is an appropriation for a therapist in the short term. Obviously, we've got a waiting list, and now that the school year has started, we have to wait and see whether or not that list will grow. Obviously, in a perfect world, we wouldn't want a waiting list at all. I do really like Councilmember Rice's recommendation for us to explore the feasibility of a partnership with the state to see what, if anything, can be done there. Acknowledging that we could probably use the therapist in virtually every category across the board within DHHS right now, and all are critically important. And then as far as the space is concerned, I would love to hear back from DHHS through a partnership with DGS to identify some potential alternative locations, either by moving one of the or more of the existing organizations that are in the space so that we can consolidate more of the space for Treehouse, or identifying an alternative location for Treehouse. Because while we've made steps, as Councilmember Rice said, as is often the case, as soon as you open something, the need grows. But a report on options would be great, and I know there are probably no perfect options, but there may be something that's out there that may make sense. As an example, the Department of Recreation is vacating its headquarters on Randolph Road, and while there's a call for the elimination of that building, they are entertaining public-private partnerships for housing, and there will be a public amenity requirement within that project, and we could get creative there and see if a private developer who wants to meet as part of the housing component may be willing to build something for us, and the shell of something that the county would then have to build the interior for. There have been lots of deals like that I'm personally familiar with that have worked, and there may be others that are out there that I'm not familiar with. So I think that would be a good next step. And we never stop talking about the budget, and so it's already October practically, and so I do think that we'll be having conversations in the very near future about next year's operating budget, and I could say, speaking for myself, this will be a high priority for me going into the next fiscal year, but I'm not sure that an appropriation within this fiscal year, given the challenges, is possible. But I do think going into next year is something we should actively explore and see what we can do with the state as well. As we're wrapping up, were there any closing comments or thoughts on what, if anything? I know, as was pointed out, there are some other key stakeholders and partners who are not at the table, because we were talking about this almost exclusively from a therapist perspective, but in partnership with the state's attorney's office, as we're trying to close these cases, this starts shifting over into public safety. But is there anything that you would like to say about that, Tom, and as a follow-up to this conversation on the enforcement aspect of this, to bring the folks that have perpetrated these crimes to justice?
I would say simply that the Treehouse is focused on the victim and their recovery. Simultaneously, our multidisciplinary team wants to protect victims and hold offenders accountable. And we, including the contractors, do our part to meet both objectives.
And Councilmember Rice has another follow-up.
I apologize. I just thought of something when you were mentioning about the waiting list and just referencing it again, because I'm curious, how do we, and do we, and I should know this because we've been talking with Treehouse for a long time, but I don't think we've ever talked about this, in terms of how we process the waiting list? Is it just in terms of first in, first out kind of, or is it that folks who have, if there's someone who's experiencing a higher level of trauma, somebody who really needs the services more, but there's still a waiting list, are they still waiting, or are they prioritized and bumped up the list? I'm just curious as to how that process works.
It is a fair question. I need to begin by telling you that if the family has private insurance, we know trauma-trained providers that we send them to. Okay. So we're talking about people who need to be at the Treehouse. We do have a sophisticated screening process that tells us we should not put this child on the waiting list, and we bring them in. And we do check-ins with people who are on the waiting list to make sure they haven't worsened in the time that they are. And that's kind of how we do it.
That's really important to know, so thank you for that. Yep.
Well, thank you all very much for this particular briefing. We will be monitoring this closely, and this will be a high priority going into FY21 for sure. And we will see what we can do with the state to increase capacity even more. But thank you all for the incredible work, and we greatly appreciate it. Thank you.